Okay, so maybe let's talk a bit about sort of action in the world then. I know, I briefly read your new book because this was put together fairly fast. And it seems like the emphasis there is like, hey, what is the relation between inner work and outer work?
Hmm.
Sometimes Buddhism has this notion of it's about escaping from the world. It's about being non-attached to things, and then there's the whole engaged Buddhist kind of tradition. So yeah, let's go there for the last part of the interview.
Well, nobody fully escapes, anyway, because you're either living in a monastic community or you're living in society in some way. And um, even here, in these conditions, like I was reading one of the meditations from the new book out loud, being recorded for this journal, and they chose a meditation on loving kindness for a neutral person. That's somebody we don't like or dislike. And we usually say, try to choose someone you'll run into now and then, because that way you'll notice. Because again, in their formal meditation, maybe nothing much happens, but you will find that as you encounter this person again and again over time, you're interested in them, you care about them, you wish them well, you feel a connection. So for probably 45 years, my colleagues and I have been saying, like the checkout person in the supermarket, like there's the kind of person we're completely indifferent to. And as I was reading that out loud, I thought, whoops, look at that. How do we think we get fed? And, now we call them
Yeah,
essential workers here. And
right,
we realize, oh, look at that. I am counting on these people showing up or I'm not going to get any food.
right.
And, how could we be indifferent? And so it's like waking up to our essential connection, which is really, really important. And I think we do that anyway in the course of meditating and getting more insight and getting clearer, but we often don't know what to do with it, like how to express it, how to manifest it in some way. And so that was kind of in a way the genesis of the book.
Mm, mm. And in terms of the relationship, is it about we meditate to, self-care is a big thing for a lot of people, and then it gives us enough resilience to go and do what we need to do? Because it's tough, it's tough. It's tough sitting with people who are upset. It's tough getting shouted at. It's tough, whatever. Or is it that it actually brings a different quality to that? Like I've worked with protesters and, from Occupy to gay rights to all sorts of things. And a lot of them don't exactly have a very pleasant manner, I've noticed. It's not very, not very compelling for people who aren't already bought into it. Like, what's your sense of the relationship between Buddhist practice, mindfulness practice, and perhaps activism or work in the world?
Well, I think it can go in lots of different directions. A fair amount of what I did in the book was have other people speak. They were interviewed, and so activists would talk about anger and how it was devouring them. You say not a very pleasant manner. Maybe there was a degree of outrage that was really important in the beginning. To kind of step out of one's comfort zone and say, "Hey, this seems wrong," and we should do something about it. But this one woman, this friend Malika Dutt, we met at a conference. We were just put on a panel together, and we became friends. And she said on that panel, right off the bat, she told a terrible story of how she became an activist in terms of what she was witnessing, almost accidentally. And then she said, "But I don't know how to dial it down. I don't know how to turn it off." And she said, "It's fills the organizations. People turn on one another. It's
A
like,
lot of infighting in those
yeah,
organizations, a lot of blaming, a lot of infighting, a lot
yeah."
of
And I've seen her, in the years since, and she's become a practitioner and shaman, and like all kinds of things. So some of it is that, and some of it is really, I think, broadening our idea of what social action is. I had a conversation with kind of feminist icon, Bell Hooks, and she said she didn't like the term social action. I told her, she's a friend, that I'm used to Buddhist scholars being like maddeningly picayune about words, but she has them all beat. She's like, which is probably why she's a great writer. But she doesn't like the term social action because she thinks it's limited in people's minds to protesting and marching. And she said, what about art? What about creativity?
Yeah.
You know, and so I think that was motivating me too, to help maybe broaden our view of what makes change, what makes fundamental change. You know, like how do we live an ethos of interconnection? And then, interestingly enough, because I wrote the entire book except for the new preface before the pandemic, even, you know, and I turned it in, and I was like, whoa. A friend was reading it, and he said to me, he basically liked the book, but he kept reading the examples, thinking, this is what made you anxious? Wait till you see what's coming down the pike, you know? And so that's when I went to the publisher and asked to write a new preface. But like, there's a chapter in there on transforming anger to courage. There's a chapter in transforming grief to resilience. And somebody said to me the other day, are you psychic? You know? And I said, no, I was haunted by the thought that I wrote it too, you know, that I hadn't like written, you know, really up to the minute things in some way.
Mm-hmm. Was there anyone who really impressed you, or just, you know, just to take one example, perhaps, you know, there's a lot of great sort of speaking throughout the voices in the book, and different kinds of cool people doing interesting things. Maybe the average Buddhist wouldn't necessarily be exposed to. You know, I don't think in many of the Buddhist books I've read, I've ever seen some similar examples. You know, it's always like kind of middle class, mundane. You know, when you're stuck in traffic, and I'm like reading this in Afghanistan, going, yeah, this is not my biggest problem right now. You know, so it's maybe it's one of the examples you want to give from one of the people in the book.
Sure. Not everybody in the book is a Buddhist practitioner or even a meditator, although many are. And the ones who weren't, I thought, you know, were coming from such a strong value system that they were really embodying something that was remarkable and important for all of us. So there's this one woman, Chantal, who's kind of early in the book, who is one of the leaders of the striking fast food worker movement in the States, where these people who work at like McDonald's and places like that,
pay,
you
right?
know,
Barely living wage.
Yeah, they're getting horrible wages. They often don't get their rightful wages. You know, they're cheated in a lot of ways, and some of them work really, really hard. They're living in homeless shelters because they can't afford to live on that salary. So the movement was to get $15 an hour as minimum wage and the right to unionize. And so Chantal is this African American woman who has worked in those, you know, places for a long time, and she became one of the leaders of the movement. And you know, and talking to her and other people in the movement, and it was interesting because it was a friend who's an activist who brought us together, sort of yoga teachers and meditation teachers and these activists, and it was very much, you know, saying to the Buddhists, these are incredible people, you should meet them, not like you can really help these people. And he was right, you know, they are really incredible people. And so many of them would say, you know, my own family didn't want me to say anything. You know, they said, you've got almost nothing. If you threaten, if you rock the boat, you're going to have absolutely nothing. And they said, but I couldn't keep quiet, you know, and I realized, like, talking to Chantal, it was a kind of self-respect. In Buddhist terminology, I would talk about the innate dignity of everybody. That everybody has worth innately. And it was taking a stand on that, like, and not just for herself, but for others. She says in the book, you know, I kept thinking about the next generation, like these young kids who are coming up, same conditions, same hardships, and no future. And she said, it shouldn't be that way. We have to think about somebody other than ourselves. And, you know, so she was the kind of person that I just found remarkable.
It's nice to hear it kind of goes both ways as well, because you often hear, this is how mindfulness can help, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, why not make that a mutual learning? You know, like, how can be informed by protest movements or by unionism? Or they didn't really have unions in the time of the Buddha, as far as I can tell. And, you know, I'm a fan of that. And I guess one thing I was kind of waiting for in it, and tell me if you think there's a potential critique of some of the identity type politics of modern activism, which seems to be very interested in conceptual categories in a way I think is quite un-Buddhist. Like there's a Buddhist part of me and I can't quite articulate it, but it's a little uncomfortable, a lot uncomfortable at times with some of the current flavor of activism, which feels you mentioned sort of bell hooks, sort of language obsession seems to be a part of it as well, actually. As opposed to like, is there real compassion, or is it just that someone's got the wrong word? They're not up to date on the latest terminology. I'm seeing a lot of people with real compassion who are sort of being strung up because they haven't learned the right etiquette.
Yeah.
I don't know if you had any take on that.
Well, I mean, there's always both the means and the ends, and then there's also process. So you don't necessarily want to stay at the place in the process where you find yourself in any given moment, but like to think that things are still moving, So I think of like two examples of how I defined or how I reconceptualized a goal or a vision. One was a friend of mine, her daughter was born in China, adopted by these white Americans. And when she was a young child, she was maybe 4 or 5 years old, she was in a movie. And the movie had lots of kids in it. It was like about a family reunion and families come together, and she was one of the kids. And the condition of her mom for letting her be in the movie was that the script never mentioned that she was adopted. She just wanted people to look at this family, 2 white parents, bunch of white kids, and this little Asian girl, and say, that's what a family might look like. And no explanation, no excuse, no apology. Just sometimes families look like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember also there was this television show, Grey's Anatomy, on television in the U.S. And the first time I saw it, and I saw it maybe 3 times, but I saw it, the first time I saw it, it was so striking because it was so multiracial and none of that was ever mentioned. The head of the hospital was like a black neurosurgeon or something, but nobody said like, hey, he's black, that's unusual or anything like that. And so that was sort of like, it's like Martin Luther King Jr.'s beloved community. I thought that's what it should be. You don't have to explain it. This is what families can look like. This is what hospital staff can look like. This is what anything could look like and should look like. Mm-hmm. In fact, does look like, but now because of the sort of almost like the cries of pain that are so prevalent, I'm thinking, well, maybe, Shonda Rhimes in writing Grey's Anatomy should have an episode on what that guy went through on his way to becoming the head of the hospital. Mm-hmm. Maybe we have to hear it and say, well, this is not just the beloved community. This is people who got there at a tremendous cost and other people who sailed in or, whatever it is. And so I think that's a lot of what's happening is that a conversation, that maybe needs to happen is happening. I would hate to think that we're not going to get to that place where we just say this is what a company can look like. This is what a meditation center can look like.
A vision or a dream when it seemed like it was going that way, and now something else. Okay, thank you. Anything else on the sort of action in the world front before we wrap up, or
yeah, well, I mean, I think I was very glad that I wrote the chapters that I did, and about grief, about anger, about in fact about fear. And there's a chapter I really like about taking in the joy, because sometimes that's hard too. There's so much guilt or exposure to suffering that it just feels wrong to have kind of a time of joy or relief, and yet we need it, because the body can't go on forever, it just can't. And so it'd be interesting, when the book comes out. We'll see.
Sharon, it feels like we're sort of moving to a natural close here. I found a lot of good stuff of yours online, so I'd recommend people kind of look up a lot of good interviews and good things that are out there, TED Talks and all the rest of it. It was an intense education for me the last 2 or 3 days, which I very much enjoyed while walking around and on the train and doing my business. So I recommend that. In terms of your books, I've heard you have a very good primer, don't you? Sort of introduction to the whole mindfulness field. What's the name?
Yeah, that's Real Happiness.
Real Happiness, and then
the audio version's read by me.
Read by
a lot
you.
Of struggle.
Yeah, I don't like it when I have a book read by someone else. I can get the authenticity piece there as much as anything. And then we talked about your book on metta, and then your latest book. When is that out? I mean, we're going to put this podcast out fairly soon, so
September 1st.
September 1st. Okay, so it'll be round about the time we publish this if we get straight to it. And that is called Real Change on Flatiron Books. I'm sure people can find it in all the normal places.
That's right.
Okay, 2 things to finish then. So anything else you want to sort of point people to, awesome resources yourself or else in other mindfulness sort of community things out there that you just think everyone should know about this? This is great.
I think there is so much. I'm very happy that the Insight Meditation Society, which I co-founded, is doing more online and being closed, and I think it's just a tremendous thing to be able to either do a sitting or drop into a teaching or take a course or even a retreat online. It's pretty great.
Okay, I want to give a little shout out to Rob Babea, wherever you are, Rob, in the world or somewhere else right now. Like a great loss. I never managed to get him on the show, and he was the one that got me started with the metta, and it's been a huge influence on a lot of people in the UK in the sort of school, through Gaia House. So shout out to all the Gaia House people. I know a lot of his students are really missing him right now. So this feels like a moment to say that. And Sharon, do you have a closing message about the body? Anything at all you want to say about the body for all our listeners?
Well, embodiment in my mind is like moving from abstraction to reality. It's like, how am I going to live this value? How am I going to make this real? Something like that. And the vehicle is really going to be the mind body in some united way.
Sharon, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a total pleasure. I was sort of professionally happy when I heard you were coming to the conference. I thought, big name, that will attract people. That's great. But also just personally as well. So they were sincerely personally happy when I heard that as well. So thank you, Sharon, for joining us today, and we'll see you at the conference as well.
Thank you so much.